Agnes Ellsworth stood beside the flour barrels in Pike Crossing Mercantile while three women laughed over the fact that the banker's daughter had not spoken a word to defend herself. Her gloved hands were empty, her breakfast plate still sitting untouched on the counter behind her, and a paper tag had been pinned to her satchel like she was freight waiting for removal. At the doorway, Clint Monroe, a railroad cowboy guard with dust on his coat and a rifle scar across one knuckle, had only come for coffee, cartridges, and salt pork. He did not expect to find a silent woman being shamed in public by the very town that owed her father money. Then her father said, "Put her on the eastbound before supper," and Agnes lowered her eyes like she had already been sold to the rails. "Before the dust rises, write your country in the comments so I know where this story found you. If you enjoy lonely cowboys, brave women, and love that heals old wounds, subscribe for the next tale." By the time Clint Monroe stepped into Pike Crossing Mercantile, the store had grown quiet, in the way a town grows quiet when cruelty has already been spoken, and everyone is waiting to see if it will be repeated. He carried a folded supply list in one hand and his hat in the other, because Mr. Orenpie, the storekeeper, had a rule about hats at the counter, though he never minded when bankers kept theirs on. Clint had ridden in with the railroad pay wagon just after sunrise, guarding a box of company money and 2 crates of telegraph wire. His orders were plain: buy supplies for the division camp west of town, check on a delayed shipment of oats, be back at the spur before the afternoon freight whistled. He had no orders about bankers' daughters. Agnes Ellsworth stood near the flour barrels, as still as a figure carved from pale pine. She wore a gray travel dress with sleeves a little too long, as if it had been chosen for her by someone who wanted every inch of her hidden. One glove was buttoned, the other hung open at the wrist. On the floor at her feet sat a brown leather satchel with a paper tag tied to its handle. The tag read, "Miss Agnes Ellsworth, eastbound, no return." Clint's eyes stayed on those last 2 words longer than he meant them to. Behind the counter, a white plate held a piece of cold toast and 2 slices of bacon gone stiff with grease. Somebody had set it there for her, and then denied her even the dignity of eating it in peace. Mrs. Lottie Vale, the pastor's wife, stood with 2 other women near the ribbon case. They were not laughing loudly now, but Clint had heard enough from the porch. "Pretty thing, isn't she?" one of them had said. Pretty is no help when a woman's tongue has turned to stone. Then a man's voice, sharp with embarrassment rather than grief, had answered, "She has been indulged long enough." That man now stood near the counter in a black coat too fine for the dusty street. Elias Ellsworth, president of the Pike Crossing Bank, had the kind of face men trusted with mortgages and regretted trusting when payment came due. His beard was trimmed close, his watch chain shone, his eyes kept sliding from his daughter to the door, as if he hoped the depot master would appear and take the trouble away. Agnes did not look at him. She looked at the floorboards. Pike Crossing had a way of making room around a person it had chosen not to protect. There was space around Agnes, space enough for a horse to pass through, though the store was crowded with ranch wives, mule drivers, and a boy sent for lamp oil. Every face pretended not to stare. Clint had seen men under gunfire stand with more comfort than Agnes Ellsworth stood beneath those whispers. Orenpie cleared his throat. "What'll it be, Monroe?" Clint unfolded his list. "Coffee, salt pork, beans, hardtack, kerosene, 2 sacks of flour if your price ain't climbed again." "My price follows the rail," Pike said. "Your price follows your appetite." A few men smiled, but nobody laughed. The room was too full of Agnes' silence. Elias Ellsworth turned, recognizing Clint not as a man but as a function. Railroad guard, armed rider, useful when money moved, not useful at dinner tables. "Mr. Monroe," he said, "you are delaying business. I'm buying supplies, then buy them." Clint looked once more at the tag on the satchel. "Eastbound leaves at 4. It does? She going visiting?" Elias's jaw tightened. "That is a family matter." Agnes' fingers curled around the open glove at her wrist. It was the only movement she made, but Clint saw it. He had learned to notice small motions. A man guarding payroll did not watch the gun first. He watched the hand going toward it. Family matters usually don't need freight tags, Clint said. A soft gasp came from the ribbon case. Elias stepped closer. My daughter has been unwell since her mother's death. She refuses conversation, refuses society, refuses every decent proposal made for her future. I have arranged care with relatives in St. Louis. That is all Pike Crossing needs to know. Agnes raised her eyes then. They were not empty. That was the first thing Clint noticed. The town mistook silence for weakness because it was convenient. But Agnes Ellsworth's eyes were full of words held back behind a locked door. Fear was there. Shame too. But beneath both sat a steadiness that struck him harder than any plea could have. She looked at Clint as if she expected nothing from him. That bothered him. He preferred people who asked straight. He preferred debts written in ink, danger standing in the open, arrangements settled by wage or bullet. A silent woman with a freight tag on her satchel was the sort of trouble that could ruin a man's afternoon, then his job, then the life he had managed to keep narrow enough to endure. Oren Pike began filling the order, moving slower than necessary. Elias took Agnes by the elbow. She flinched. Clint's hand closed around his hat brim. He had not meant to speak again. He had spent 6 years teaching himself not to step into other people's fires. His own sister, Ruth, had once begged him to interfere in a marriage arrangement she feared. Clint had told her people had to make their own choices. 2 months later, she was dead in a wagon wreck on a road she had taken to escape the man. Since then, Clint had guarded railroad money with more tenderness than he guarded his own heart. Elias tugged Agnes toward the door. Her satchel tipped over. The tag flipped against the floor. No return, Clint heard himself say. She can ride west with me. Every head turned. Agnes went still. Elias stared. I beg your pardon. Clint wished the words back the instant they landed, not because he regretted stopping the man, but because he could feel the wrong shape of them. They sounded like a purchase. They sounded like a claim. He forced his voice flatter. Division camp needs a cook and a book hand. Woman can keep accounts if she's been raised in a bank. Mrs. Vale whispered. Railroad camp, one of the other women murmured. Alone with that gar. Clint's face hardened. He had done that too often in life. Set his jaw when patience might have served better. My foreman's wife is at Cinder Creek. There's a spare room at the section house until Miss Ellsworth decides what road she wants. Agnes' eyes did not leave him. Elias laughed once. My daughter is not available for hire. She's available for shipping. A flush rose under the banker's beard. Clint stepped to the satchel, lifted it, and untied the tag. He did not tear it. He folded it once and set it on the counter beside the cold plate. I am asking you, he said to Elias. Then, awkwardly, too late, he turned to Agnes. I'm asking her. The store held its breath. Agnes looked at the door, where sunlight poured over the threshold and dust blew in from the street. Beyond that lay the depot, the eastbound train, her father's decision, and whatever waited in St. Louis. Then she looked at the supplies stacked for Clint. Beans, flour, coffee, cartridges, a coil of rope, plain things meant for work and weather. Her lips parted. No sound came. Elias smiled with cruel relief. You see? This is foolish. Agnes reached into the pocket of her dress and drew out a small pencil stub. Oren Pike, startled, pushed a scrap of wrapping paper toward her. Her hand trembled only once. She wrote 4 words and slid them across the counter. I choose west. Clint read them. Something in his chest tightened, not soft enough to be hope and not sharp enough to be fear, but near to both. He nodded. All right, Miss Ellsworth. Elias moved as if to snatch the paper, but Clint's hand came down over it first. The banker's voice dropped low. You will regret embarrassing me. Clint met his eyes. I've regretted worse. Outside, the railroad whistle cried from the far end of town. long and lonesome. It sounded less like departure than warning. Agnes picked up her satchel. Clint took his supplies on credit against the railroad account, though Pike wrote every item with a sour mouth, already imagining what the town would say by supper. When Clint led Agnes into the street, people came to windows. The blacksmith paused with his hammer lifted. A boy at the hitching rail stared. Across the road, a church bell rope swayed in the open doorway, though no bell rang. Clint did not offer his arm. He should have. He knew at the moment they stepped down from the boardwalk, and Agnes stumbled in the wheel rut. But offering tenderness in public felt like laying a loaded gun on a table. He carried her satchel instead, and walked half a pace ahead, as if he were escorting a prisoner rather than helping a woman. Behind them, Elias Ellsworth called, "Agnes, you will come back when you understand hunger." She stopped. Clint stopped too. For a moment he thought she might turn around. Instead, she reached into her pocket again, drew out the pencil, and wrote on another scrap against the side of her satchel. "I already do." She handed it to Clint, not her father. Then she walked on. The trouble with doing a right thing badly was that folks remembered the bad part first. By noon, half of Pike Crossing had decided Clint Monroe had taken Agnes Ellsworth as payment for a bank debt, though no such debt existed. By 1, the story had changed to him hiring her as a camp drudge. By 2, Mrs. Vale had reportedly said Agnes had been lured into disgrace by a man with a rifle and no church pew to his name. Clint heard 3 versions before he finished loading the wagon. Agnes heard them too. She sat on the wagon bench with her hands folded over her satchel, her bonnet brim hiding most of her face. He had bought her a tin cup of coffee from the depot stand and a meat pie wrapped in newspaper. He had set them beside her without comment, trying not to make a display of kindness. When he looked back after tying down the flour sacks, the coffee remained untouched. He climbed onto the bench. "You ought to eat." She did not move. "I ain't saying that as an order." Her fingers tightened. Clint sighed. He was better with spooked horses than people. A horse told you with its ears, its breath, the whites of its eyes. People hid pain under manners until it came out sideways. He took the meat pie, broke it in half, and ate his portion first. Then he set the rest between them on the bench. "No poison," he said. Agnes looked at him, and for the first time since the store, he saw a flicker of something almost like offense. Not anger exactly, more like dignity waking up. She picked up the pie and ate in small bites, careful not to drop crumbs on her dress. The wagon rolled west out of Pike Crossing, past the church, past the bank with its green-painted door, past the depot platform, where the eastbound passenger train waited under steam. Clint did not look at the train. Agnes did. Her face remained still, but her shoulders lowered when they passed the final switch and did not turn toward the platform. The railroad road followed the iron tracks through a valley of buffalo grass and mesquite. Telegraph poles marched beside them like thin black crosses. Far off, a freight engine pushed smoke into the blue sky. Clint kept one eye on the trail and one on the ridges. Payroll guards did not survive by admiring scenery. After a mile, Agnes took out her pencil. "Where are you taking me?" He read the paper and felt the shame of realizing he had not explained enough. Cinder Creek Section House is 12 miles west. Railroad keeps a crew there for track repair. Foreman is Daniel Hobb. His wife, Mary, runs the kitchen when she idle, which she is. "They need help," I said bookhand, because Mary can count but hates ledgers. Agnes wrote again. "Am I free to leave?" The question struck him clean through. He pulled the team to a slower walk. "Yes." She washed his face as if weighing the word. He added, "I don't keep people. I guard freight." It came out colder than he intended. Agnes folded the paper and put it away. For the next hour, they rode without speaking. The land opened wide around them, brown and gold under the afternoon sun. A jackrabbit startled from a clump of sage. The wagon wheels cracked over dry ruts. Clint told himself silence suited him fine. He had lived beside it for years. But Agnes' silence was not like his. His was a fence. Hers felt like a locked room with someone still inside. Near a washout crossing, one of the wagon wheels sank hard into a rut. Agnes jolted sideways, and Clint caught her by the arm before she fell. She froze beneath his hand. He let go at once. Sorry. Her face had gone pale. He climbed down, cursing himself under his breath, and checked the wheel. The axle held, but the wagon had wedged against a buried stone. He took off his coat, shoved his shoulder to the sideboard, and pushed while the team strained. Dust rose around his boots. The wagon lurched free, but the sudden release sent one flour sack sliding off the back. It burst open on the ground, white powder spilling like snow into the dirt. Clint swore. Agnes climbed down carefully. He expected her to stand aside. Instead, she knelt by the torn sack, gathered what flour remained clean, and folded the burlap over with quick, practical hands. "You don't have to do that," he said. She looked up at him. He heard his mistake before she wrote it. "I know." There was no anger in the words. That made them worse. He crouched across from her. "I ain't used to asking help." She studied him, then wrote, "Neither am I." He almost smiled, but something in her face stopped him. This was not a clever exchange to her. It was a fact, paid for dearly. They salvaged half the sack. Clint tied it with rope and loaded it again. When he turned back, Agnes had flour dust on one sleeve and a streak on her cheek. Without thinking, he reached to brush it away. She stepped back. His hand dropped. "Sorry," he said again, rougher this time. Her eyes searched his. Then she lifted her gloved hand and wiped the flour herself. The road bent toward a shallow creek where cottonwoods leaned over muddy water. Clint stopped to rest the team. Agnes walked to the bank and washed the flour from her glove. He watched from a distance, giving her room. She removed her bonnet. Sunlight caught the brown shine of her hair, pinned too tightly, as if even her hair had been taught not to move. He had thought her fragile in town. Now he was less sure. Fragile things broke when dropped. Agnes Ellsworth had been dropped in front of a whole town and was still standing. A rider appeared on the eastern road near late afternoon, galloping hard. Clint reached for his rifle. Agnes saw the movement and turned. The rider slowed when he saw Clint armed. It was young Samuel Briggs, the bank clerk, his collar crooked and his face red from haste. "Mr. Monroe," he shouted. "Mr. Ellsworth says you're to bring her back. Says there are legal papers. Says Miss Agnes ain't of sound mind." Agnes went rigid. Clint kept his rifle angled down, but visible. "You carrying papers?" Samuel hesitated. "No, sir, but," he said. "Then you're carrying wind." Samuel looked at Agnes, and his expression softened with pity. In a way Clint disliked almost as much as cruelty. "Miss Agnes, your father says it's best. You know how folks talk. You can't stay out here with railroad men. It ain't proper." Agnes' mouth tightened. Clint looked at her. "You want to answer?" Her hand went to her pocket, then stopped. She stepped forward instead. Samuel waited, almost hopeful, as if her silence gave him permission to decide for her. Agnes lifted her chin and shook her head once. "No," Samuel swallowed. "But Miss Agnes?" Clint raised the rifle an inch. She answered. The clerk backed his horse. "Does one end here?" "Most things don't," Clint said. Samuel rode away, trailing dust. Agnes stood in the road until he disappeared. Then her shoulders shook once. Not a sob. Not quite. She pressed both hands to her mouth as if holding herself together from the outside. Clint wanted to tell her she was safe. He did not, because he knew safety was a promise men made too easily. Instead, he said the only true thing he had. "Hell sends somebody else." She nodded. "I'll not hand you over without your say." Her eyes lifted. It was not comfort, but it was a beginning. They reached Cinder Creek at dusk, when the sky burned orange behind the water tower, and the rails shone like two lines of fire. The section house stood beside the tracks, a long timber building with a kitchen lamp glowing in one window. Beyond it lay a barn, a coal shed, a bunkhouse for the men, and Clint's own small cabin set apart under a wind-bent elm. Mary Hobb came onto the porch wiping her hands on an apron. She was round with child and suspicion. "Clint Monroe," she called. "Tell me, that is not the banker's daughter you've brought in my wagon." Clint climbed down. "Is." Mary stared at Agnes. Agnes stared back, pale with exhaustion. Daniel Hobb came from the barn with a lantern. "There, trouble?" "Some," Clint said. Mary descended the steps more slowly. Her gaze moved over Agnes' travel dress, the satchel, the stiff way she held herself. "Have you eaten proper today?" Mary asked. Agnes hesitated. Clint said, "Half a meat pie." Mary shot him a look of disgust. "Men." Then she reached for Agnes' satchel. "Come inside, child. There's stew." Agnes did not surrender the satchel, but she followed. At the threshold, she looked back once at Clint. He stood in the yard with flour on his shirt, a rifle at his side, and the uncomfortable knowledge that his imperfect rescue had only carried her from one danger into another. He nodded, because he had no gentler language ready. Agnes stepped into the warm light. Cinder Creek taught Agnes Ellsworth the shape of work that did not ask her to apologize for existing. Morning began before sunrise with the cough of engines in the distance, the clank of tools, the smell of coffee, boiling strong enough to float a horseshoe. Mary Hobb put Agnes in the kitchen on the first day, but not as a servant. That mattered. She gave Agnes an apron, a ledger, and a choice. You can peel potatoes, tally ration costs, or sit by the stove until your bones remember they belong to you, Mary said. Agnes chose the ledger. Her handwriting was neat, the numbers straight as fence posts. By noon, she had found 3 errors in the supply account, 1 double charge from Pike's Mercantile, and a missing credit for oats delivered the week before. Daniel Hobb leaned over the table, scratched his beard, and let out a whistle. "Clint, your silent bank girl just saved us $11.40. Agnes' cheeks colored. Clint, standing in the doorway with a tin cup in hand, said, "She has a name." The room went quiet. Agnes looked up. Daniel removed his hat. "Miss Ellsworth, then." Mary smiled into the stew pot, pretending she had not noticed the small defense. Clint noticed Agnes noticing it. He turned away before gratitude could make him uncomfortable. He spent most days riding between Cinder Creek and the grading crews, guarding pie roll, checking culverts, and watching for men who thought railroad money belonged to whoever had the nerve to take it. He returned at dusk to find small signs of Agnes everywhere. The kitchen shelf set in better order. Mary resting with her feet up while Agnes kneaded dough. A torn curtain, mended in threads so fine, the repair nearly vanished. The ledger balanced. She still did not speak. At first the men treated her silence like a sickness. They raised their voices when addressing her, as if volume might cross whatever distance words could not. One young hand, Teddy Voss, asked Mary if Miss Ellsworth was deaf. Agnes, passing with a tray of biscuits, stopped, set down the tray, and wrote on the chalkboard Mary used for kitchen cows. "I hear foolishness clearly." Daniel laughed so hard, he spilled coffee down his vest. Teddy turned red to his ears and never made that mistake again. Clint heard about it later from Mary and found himself smiling alone in the barn. He stopped smiling when Agnes entered and caught him. She had come for eggs, carrying a basket in the crook of one arm. The hens complained around her skirts. Clint was oiling his rifle at the tack bench, the barrel laid across a cloth. For a moment, neither moved. Agnes pointed to the rifle, then to the tracks outside. "Pyrol, tomorrow," he said. "Men get hungry when iron roads come through. Some hungry men steal. Some steal because they like it." She set down the basket and took out her pencil. "Have you killed men?" He looked at the words a long time. "Yes." Her face did not change, but the hand holding the pencil tightened. "Not as many as stories say," he added. "More than I wanted." She wrote, "Does it trouble you?" He almost gave the answer he gave other people. A guard did his work. A man fired when fired upon. Regret was useless baggage on a long ride. But Agnes had a way of waiting that made lies feel loud. "Jazzer," he said. She folded the paper, not asking more. He should have been relieved. Instead, he found himself wanting to explain, and the wanting irritated him. My sister hated guns, he said. Ruth, she said. A man carrying one too long started thinking every problem had the same answer. Agnes looked at him with such still attention that the barn seemed to hush around them. She was right about a good many things. Clint finished. Agnes wrote slowly. Where is she now? Clint put the rifle cloth over the barrel. Gone. Agnes' eyes softened, and he looked away because softness could undo a man faster than a bullet. After that, their days began to touch in small places. He fixed the loose step outside the kitchen after seeing her stumble there in the dark. She left a folded cloth beside his coffee because the handle of his tin cup burned his fingers. He showed her how to read the telegraph marks when they came clicking through the office, and she showed him how to catch a ledger lie by watching where a man rounded numbers. He never asked why she did not speak. She never asked why he slept with a chair wedged against his cabin door. On Sundays, Mary insisted they all ride into Pike Crossing for church. Agnes did not want to go. Clint saw it in the way she buttoned and unbuttoned her glove that morning. The gray travel dress had been washed and pressed, but it still carried the memory of the mercantile. Mary offered a blue shawl. You don't know that town, your fear, Mary said. Agnes wrote, I owe my mother a visit, so they went. Pike Crossing Church was small, whitewashed, and full of eyes. Whispers rose the moment Agnes entered behind Mary. Clint came in last and stood near the back wall, hat in hand, feeling every glance that measured the distance between him and the banker's daughter. Elias Ellsworth sat in the front pew, alone. He did not turn around, but his shoulders stiffened. Reverend Vale preached on the prodigal son, though he looked too often at Agnes when saying the word wayward. Clint's temper warmed by slow degrees. Agnes sat straight through all of it. Only once did her composure falter. When the hymn began, her lips parted on the first line, and no sound came. She closed them quickly. Clint saw, so did Lottie Vale. After service, women gathered under the cottonwood outside, speaking softly enough to pretend kindness and loudly enough to wound. Her poor father. A railroad camp is no place for a lady. I heard she keeps company with guards and section hands. Elias approached with Samuel Briggs at his side. The bank clerk carried a leather folio. Agnes, Elias said, his voice smooth for public ears, you have had your rebellion. Come home. Agnes did not move. Mary stepped closer to her, but Clint held back. He had learned something in the past week. Agnes did not need every battle taken from her. Sometimes help became another kind of cage. Elias opened the folio. I have here a letter from Dr. Penrose in St. Louis, confirming arrangements for your care. Agnes' face went white. Clint stepped forward then, but Agnes lifted one hand, stopping him. She took out her pencil. The churchyard washed as she wrote against the cover of her own small notebook. I am not ill because I will not obey. A murmur moved through the crowd. Elias's expression cracked. This is not dignity, Agnes. This is spectacle. She wrote again. Then why did you make one? For the first time since Clint had met him, Elias Ellsworth had no quick answer. Samuel Briggs looked down. Reverend Vale cleared his throat. Perhaps this is a family matter best handled. No, Mary said sharply. It was made public. Let it breathe public air. Clint stared at her with admiration. Elias closed the folio. His voice lowered. You have no money of your own, no position, no protection beyond temporary charity. When that ends, you will understand. Agnes' hand trembled. Clint felt every eye turned toward him. They expected him to claim her, deny her, or shame her by silence. He said, she has wages at Cinder Creek. Eliza smiled faintly. Wages? For kitchen work? For account work? Clint said, more honest than some banking. A dangerous stillness followed. Elias looked at Clint with hatred polished thin as glass. Take care, Mr. Monroe. Railroads run on credit. So do men. Clint knew the threat. The bank held notes from half the town. It could trouble the railroad contract if Elias pushed hard enough. Agnes looked at Clint, alarmed. He should have stopped there. A wiser man would have. But Clint Monroe had never been as wise as grief had tried to make him. "I'll take care," he said. "You do the same." They rode back to Cinder Creek beneath a sky turning pearl gray with evening. Rain threatened from the west. Mary dozed in the wagon, one hand on her belly. Daniel drove. Agnes sat beside Clint in the back among sacks of feed. Halfway home, she passed him a note. "You should not risk your work for me." He read it, then looked out at the rails running beside them. "Work ain't worth much if it teaches a man cowardice." She studied him, then wrote, "Were you always brave?" He gave a humorless breath. "No," after a moment, he added. "I'm not sure I am now." Agnes folded the paper and placed it in his hand, letting her gloved fingers rest there for one brief second. It felt less like comfort than trust. And Clint, who had guarded money, mail, iron, and men, realized trust was the one cargo he feared most to carry. The past came back to Cinder Creek in a rainstorm. It was 3 nights after church, with thunder rolling low over the valley and water dripping through a weak seam in the bunkhouse roof. The men had finished supper early. Mary had gone to bed with swollen ankles. Daniel was in the telegraph office, arguing by wire over a delayed rail shipment. Agnes sat at the kitchen table, copying supply figures into a clean ledger while Clint stood at the stove, drying his coat. A knock struck the door. Not a neighbor's knock, not a friend's. 3 hard blows, based like a man announcing authority. Clint reached the door before anyone else could. Samuel Briggs stood on the porch under a dripping hat. Behind him, 2 riders waited with their horses turned against the rain. One was Deputy Niles Cafferty, a narrow man with a drooping mustache. The other was a stranger in a city coat. Samuel looked miserable. Deputy Cafferty looked important. The stranger looked bored. "Evening," Clint said. Cafferty held up a folded paper. "Court order from Abilene County. Miss Agnes Ellsworth is to be delivered into the custody of her father, pending transport to medical care." Agnes rose from the table. Clint did not open the door wider. "County judge signed that." "Judge Markham," Cafferty said. Clint knew Markham. The judge owed Elias Ellsworth money. Samuel would not meet Agnes' eyes. The stranger spoke. "I am Dr. Silas Penrose, associate. Miss Ellsworth's condition has been described in detail. It is best not to excite her." Agnes' hand closed around the back of the chair. Clint looked at the paper. "Described by who?" "Her father," the stranger said. "Then you don't know a thing." Cafferty's face hardened. "Don't make this difficult." Agnes stepped toward the table, took up her pencil, and wrote with a force that nearly tore the paper. "I will not go." Cafferty barely glanced at it. "A woman judged unsound don't get to decide." The words changed the room. Clint felt something old and ugly rise in him. Ruth's face came back as it always did when men used law to dress up fear. Ruth at 17, asking him if she had to marry a rancher twice her age because their uncle had shaken hands on it. Clint had told her the arrangement might keep peace. He had told himself he was being practical. He had told her to wait. She had waited 3 days. Then she ran. Then she'd die. Clint opened the door and stepped onto the porch, closing it behind him so Agnes would not be crowded by men. Rain ran off his hat brim. "You want her? You come with the sheriff himself, not a debt paper signed in a bank parlor." Cafferty set his hand near his revolver. "You threatening an officer?" "I'm explaining whether. Storm like this, papers get wet. Men get confused. Best come back when everyone can see clear." The deputy's eyes flicked to Clint's gun. The stranger backed down 1 step. Samuel finally spoke. "Mr. Monroe, please. Mr. Ellsworth is determined. He says if Miss Agnes is not returned, he'll speak to the railroad superintendent. He'll call in notes. People could lose homes." There it was. Human villainy did not always wear a black hat. Sometimes it wore worry. Sometimes it spoke in a clerk's shaking voice and asked the wounded to surrender so the comfortable would not be inconvenienced. The door opened behind Clint. Agnes stepped onto the porch. Rain dotted her hair and shoulders. She held a paper in both hands. Clint did not know when she had written it. Samuel read it first. His face changed. Then Clint read over his shoulder. Ask him what happened to my mother's trust. Cafferty frowned. What's that mean? Samuel's face had gone pale. Miss Agnes. She held up another paper. Ask why he sends me away before audit day. Clint turned to Samuel. What audit? The clerk swallowed. Territorial examiner is due next week. Routine bank review. The rain fell harder. Agnes's breathing quickened, but she did not retreat. She wrote again, shielding the paper poorly from the rain. Mother left money for me, for widows too. He moved it. Samuel closed his eyes. Cafferty said, this is nonsense. But Samuel whispered, no. Everyone looked at him. The clerk seemed to shrink beneath his wet coat. I saw transfers I did not understand. From Mrs. Ellsworth's trust, yes, and from the widow relief accounts after the fever year. Mr. Ellsworth said it was temporary, said the railroad speculation would return double. Agnes lowered the pencil. Clint felt the ground shift. This was not only about shame or obedience. Elias Ellsworth was not sending his daughter away because she was silent. He was sending her away because she knew where silence had been forced to stand guard. The stranger stepped back toward his horse. I was not informed of any financial dispute. No, Clint said. I expect not. Deputy Cafferty snatched at authority again. Bank matters don't change my order. Mary Hobbs' voice came from inside, sharp as a rifle crack. They change whether you'll be remembered as a fool or a scoundrel, Niles. The deputy flushed. Daniel appeared from the telegraph office with a lantern. I wired Sheriff Rawlins in Abilene when I saw your riders coming. He says no custody order crossed his desk. Says Judge Markham ain't holding court this week on account of gout. Cafferty looked at the paper in his hand. Clint stepped closer. That a real order, deputy? The deputy muttered a curse and shoved the paper into his coat. The stranger mounted first. This is outside my professional concern. Samuel did not move. Agnes looked at him. The anger in her face faded into something sadder. Samuel removed his hat. Rain flattened his hair. I am sorry, Miss Agnes. I thought silence meant you needed others to speak for you. Her pencil moved. Silence means I hear who speaks truth. Samuel's eyes filled. I help. I can bring copies from the bank. Cafferty snapped. I'll lose your position. Samuel looked toward Pike Crossing, though the town lay miles away in darkness. I believe I already lost the decent part of it. The riders left with no custody taken. Inside, Mary made everyone coffee, though it was near midnight. Agnes sat by the stove wrapped in a quilt, her face drained, while Daniel and Samuel spoke in low voices about ledgers, deposits, and the territorial examiner. Clint stood near the window, watching rain silver the tracks. He should have felt satisfied. Instead, he felt sick. Agnes had been carrying more than humiliation. She had been carrying proof, memory, betrayal, and he had nearly mistaken her for a woman simply in need of rescue, when in truth she had been trying to survive long enough to tell what powerful men needed hidden. After Samuel left before dawn with a promise to return, Clint found Agnes in the barn. She stood beside his horse, Calico, stroking the white blaze on the mare's face. The rain had stopped. Water dripped from the eaves. Dawn lay gray and soft beyond the open doors. Clint approached slowly. You ought to sleep, she wrote without looking at him. So should you. He leaned against the stall. I don't do much of that. Why? The question waited between them. He could have refused it. Once, he would have. But Agnes had stood in rain before men who came to take her, and she had not hidden behind silence. A man ought to offer some truth in return. My sister Ruth asked me for help once, he said. I gave her caution instead. She died running from what I should have stood against. Agnes lowered the pencil. I tell myself I was young, Clint continued. I tell myself I didn't know. But the truth is I didn't want trouble. Trouble came anyway. It just took her instead of me. Agnes stepped closer. He laughed once, without humor. That's why I was hard with you at first. Not because you deserved hardness. Because fear makes a man call distance wisdom. For a moment she only looked at him. Then she wrote on a clean page and handed it over. You came back for me before you knew the truth. He read it twice. You shouldn't make me better than I am. She took the paper back, added one line, and gave it to him again. Then become what I saw. The words struck deep because they asked more than forgiveness. They asked him to live forward. Clint folded the paper carefully and put it inside his vest pocket. Outside, the first train of morning whistled eastbound, carrying strangers away from places that had used them up. Agnes did not flinch at the sound. The public choice came on audit day, under a sky so clear Pike Crossing had nowhere to hide. By 10 in the morning, wagons lined the street outside the bank. Word had spread faster than telegraph wire. Samuel Briggs had carried copies of the suspicious ledgers to Cinder Creek, then to Sheriff Rawlins, who rode in from Abilene with a territorial examiner named Mr. Haskett, and a face like unbuttered bread. Elias Ellsworth tried to keep the matter inside the bank office, but widows came, farmers came, railroad men came. Women who had lowered their voices at church now stood close enough to hear every word. Agnes arrived in Mary Hobbs' wagon, wearing the blue shawl Mary had lent her. Clint rode beside the wagon on calico, rifle in saddle scabbard, jaw tight enough to ache. He had argued with her that morning, not loudly. Clint did not raise his voice at women, not after Ruth, not after learning how fear could wear a man's volume. But he had stood in the kitchen and told Agnes she did not have to face the town. She had written, "Yes, I do." He had said Elias would twist it. She had written, "Then I will stand straight while he twists." He had said people might laugh. Her answer had been slower. They already did. I lived. So he rode beside her, not ahead, not behind. That was the first choice. The second came when they reached the bank, and Superintendent Hale of the railroad stepped down from a black carriage. Clint knew trouble the moment he saw him. Hale was a narrow-eyed man with clean cuffs and a voice trained to sound disappointed before facts arrived. "Monroe," he called. Clint dismounted. "Superintendent, I received a message from Mr. Ellsworth regarding your interference in a domestic concern and your threats against a deputy officer." Agnes turned sharply. Clint said, "Deputy carried a false order. That will be determined by proper channels. Until then, the railroad cannot employ men who use company time and arms to involve themselves in scandal." The street had gone quiet. Hale removed an envelope from his coat. "You are suspended from payroll duty, pending review. Surrender your company rifle." Clint felt the old habit rise in him. Protect the job, protect the narrow life. Let the bank matter belong to the bank. The daughter to her blood, the town to its gossip. He had wages, a cabin, a name hard but usable. A suspended guard was only a man with enemies. Agnes' eyes met his. She did not plead. That mattered most. A woman who had been made freight did not ask to be carried now. She simply watched to see what he would choose. Clint pulled the rifle from his saddle and handed it to Hale. The superintendent looked relieved, as if obedience proved the world still held. Then Clint unpinned a railroad guard badge from his vest. Hale frowned. "That is not necessary. It is if you're asking me to stand aside while a man buries truth under money." "Careful, Monroe." "I was careful once," Clint said. "My sister died of it." No one moved. He placed the badge on top of the rifle. "I quit." A murmur went through the crowd. Daniel Hobbs swore softly. Mary pressed a hand to her mouth. Agnes closed her eyes for 1 second, not in weakness, but as if receiving the weight of what he had done. Elias Ellsworth emerged from the bank then, dressed in his finest black suit, His expression held sorrow shaped for public viewing. "My friends," he began, "I grieve that private family pain has been dragged into the street. My daughter has been unwell. Men of poor judgment have used her condition to attack an institution that has served this town faithfully." Agnes stepped down from the wagon. The crowd parted not kindly, but curiously. She walked to the bank steps and faced her father. For a moment Clint saw the little girl she might have been, standing before a man whose approval had once meant warmth, supper, home. Elias softened his voice. "Agnes, come inside. Do not humiliate yourself further." She took out her notebook. Elias smiled faintly. "Must we all wait while you scribble?" A few people gave uneasy laughs. Agnes stopped writing, her hand lowered. The laughter did what violence had not. It crossed some last line inside her. Clint saw it in the change of her posture, the way her shoulders settled and her chin lifted. She looked at the faces around her. Mrs. Vale Orton Pike, the widows from the fever year, ranchers with banknotes in their pockets, Samuel Briggs, standing pale beside Sheriff Rollins, Clint, with no badge left to protect him. Then Agnes Ellsworth spoke. Her voice was rough from disuse, soft but clear enough for the front row to hear. "My mother trusted him." The street froze. Elias's face emptied. Agnes swallowed, and Clint took one step closer, not to rescue, only to stand where she could see him. "She left money for me," Agnes said, "and for the widows who lost husbands in the fever. I found the ledger after she died. He told me I misunderstood. Then he told others I was sick. The less I spoke, the more he used my silence as proof." Tears stood in her eyes, but her voice held. "I stopped speaking because every word in that house was taken from me and turned against someone else. But I remember numbers. I remember dates. I remember my mother's hand beside mine, teaching me that money is a promise, not a weapon." "Mr. Haskett." The examiner adjusted his spectacles. "Miss Ellsworth, can you identify the altered accounts?" Agnes nodded. Elias snapped. "This is absurd. She has been coached." "By whom?" Mary Hobb demanded. "The flour sacks, the stew pot." A ripple moved through the crowd, not laughter this time, but recognition. Samuel came forward with his folio. His hands shook, but he opened it. "I made copies. Miss Ellsworth's figures matched the transfer drafts. I signed too, under Mr. Ellsworth's instruction. I did not know the source then. I know now." Elias turned on him. "Ungrateful boy." Samuel flinched, but did not retreat. "Yes, sir, I have been." The examiner took the papers. Sheriff Rollins stepped beside Elias. "This don't look like family pain to me," the sheriff said. "Looks like bank fraud." Elias's gaze swept the crowd, searching for old power. He found frightened debtors, angry widows, curious townspeople, and no safe corner. At last his eyes landed on Agnes. "You would ruin your own father." Agnes' voice trembled, but did not break. "You used that word to keep me obedient, father. But my mother taught me what family does. It protects the helpless. It tells the truth when lies become expensive." Elias lunged toward her. Clint moved faster. He caught Elias by the arm before the banker reached the bottom step. No gun, no blow. Just one hard grip and a look that held 6 years of grief learning discipline at last. "Do not touch her," Clint said. Elias tried to pull free. "You have no authority." "No," Clint said. "Only a choice." Sheriff Rollins took Elias by the other arm. "Das tun thou do." The arrest did not look grand. Villainy rarely did when stripped of its office. Elias Ellsworth seemed smaller, without the bank door behind him. His hat fell in the dust. No one picked it up. Mrs. Vale began to cry. The whether from guilt or shock, no one knew. Orrin Pike stood across the street, twisting his apron in both hands. The widows whispered over the ledger copies, names returning to them, like lost cattle found after winter. Agnes swayed. Clint reached for her, then stopped, remembering. She looked at his open hand. Then She took it. The street watched. Let them. Her fingers were cold. His were calloused. Neither hand knew what to do with tenderness, but they held on anyway. Superintendent Hale cleared his throat. Monroe, perhaps the railroad acted hastily. Clint did not look away from Agnes. Likely, we might discuss reinstatement. Likely not today. Agnes' grip tightened once, a small warning against pride. He almost smiled. Mr. Haskett announced that the bank would be closed, pending examination. Sheriff Rollins led Elias toward the jail. Samuel followed to give his statement. The crowd began to break into clusters, voices low and shaken. Agnes looked exhausted, as if each spoken word had cost her a year. Clint said quietly, "You found your voice." She shook her head. After a moment, she whispered, "No, I found people who would not steal it." The words entered him gently, and because they were gentle, they reached places force never had. The apology came first from the person Agnes expected least. 3 days after Elias Ellsworth's arrest, Pike Crossing held a meeting in the church because the bank was locked, and no one wanted to gather in the street where shame had done so much business. Sheriff Rollins had sent Elias under guard to Abilene. Mr. Haskett remained behind with Samuel Briggs, sorting accounts from dawn until lamplight. The missing widow funds were not all recoverable, but enough remained in hidden transfers and land notes to begin repayment. Agnes attended the meeting because the widows asked her to. Clint came because she asked him to. That difference mattered to both of them. They sat near the middle pew, with Mary Hobb on Agnes' other side, and Daniel standing in the back, because he claimed pews made him feel trapped. Clint wore no railroad badge. He had shaved badly. Agnes had noticed the cut beneath his jaw that morning, and without speaking, handed him a clean cloth. Domestic kindness frightened him more than gunfire, but he was learning not to step away from it. Reverend Vale stood before the congregation, his Bible closed in his hands. "I spoke wrongly," he said. The church went still. He looked at Agnes. "I made a sermon serve gossip. I used the word wayward when I should have asked who had wounded you. I am sorry." Agnes' fingers tightened around the edge of her notebook. Mrs. Vale stood beside him, face pale. "I laughed in the mercantile. Not loud, perhaps, but enough. I told myself it was concern. It was pride. I am sorry, too. One by one, not everyone, but enough." Apologies came like stones set down after being carried too long. Orrin Pike admitted he had pinned the eastbound tag to Agnes' satchel because Elias told him to, and because bank credit mattered more to him than a frightened woman. A widow named Mrs. Bell said she had believed Elias because believing powerful men felt safer than doubting them. Samuel Briggs stood with tears on his cheeks and said he would spend his wages helping restore what his signatures had helped move. Agnes listened to all of it. When they asked if she wished to speak, she rose slowly. Clint felt the congregation hold its breath, waiting for the miracle of a silent woman turned eloquent. But Agnes did not perform healing for them. She opened her notebook and read from what she had written. "I do not forgive all things today. Some forgiveness will take time, and some debts must be paid in more than words. But I accept truth spoken plainly. I accept help for the widows. I accept that my mother's name will not be buried under my father's shame." She paused. Then she looked at Clint. "And I accept that being protected is not the same as being owned." Clint's throat tightened. After the meeting, the widows gathered around Agnes, not crowding, just near enough to show she was no longer standing in empty space. Mrs. Bell pressed a small jar of peach preserves into her hands. Another woman offered quilt squares. Mary cried openly and blamed the baby. Clint stepped outside for air. He found Superintendent Hale waiting by the hitching rail. "Monroe," Hale said, "the railroad will take you back. Full pay restored. The company values men with courage." Clint looked down the street toward the tracks. A freight engine sat steaming by the depot. For years that sound had been his whole life. Whistle, wheel, schedule, guard, return. A narrow life, but safe from most questions. What post? He asked. Hey, tow guard. Same as before. Riding out how many days at a time? Hale frowned. As duty requires. Clint thought of his cabin as Cinder Creek. Thought of Agnes at the kitchen table, lamplight on her hair as she balanced accounts. Thought of Ruth, who had once asked him to choose trouble for love's sake. No, he said. Hale blinked. No, I'll work Cinder Creek freight when needed. I'll ride guard for local runs. But I am leaving for weeks at a stretch. The company cannot arrange itself around your domestic preferences. Clint almost laughed at the phrase, domestic preferences, as if wanting to remain near the life beginning before him was a weakness like sore feet. Then the company can arrange itself without me. Hale's mouth thinned. You would give up steady advancement. Clint looked back toward the church door as Agnes emerged into sunlight, Mary at her side. I've advanced far enough away from the man I was. Hale left dissatisfied. Agnes approached, reading his face with the skill she once used for ledgers. What did he offer? She asked. Her voice was still soft, uneven when tired, but each word came easier than the last. Oh, job? You refused? Change the terms. Can guards do that? Unemployed ones can. Concern crossed her face. Clint, he shrugged, though his heart beat hard. Daniel says Cinder Creek needs a permanent accountsman and a horse guard. Mary says if I leave, she'll name the baby after me out of spite. Agnes' smile, it was small, but it changed the weather. In the weeks that followed, Pike Crossing did not become kind all at once. No town did. People who had whispered found reasons to be busy when Agnes entered the mercantile. Some apologized twice, and meant it better the second time. Some never apologized at all, but the space around her changed. It no longer widened like a wound. Children greeted her. Widows nodded. Men removed hats. Agnes took a position overseeing restitution accounts under Mr. Haskett's temporary supervision. She worked from a desk inside the reopened bank, now managed by a committee until a proper banker could be appointed. The first day she sat behind the counter. Orrin Pike brought fresh bread and set it before her. For breakfast, he said, unable to meet her eyes. Agnes looked at the bread, then at him. Thank you. The words were not absolution. They were enough for that morning. At Cinder Creek, life settled into a rhythm that felt less like escape and more like building. Mary gave birth to a daughter with a cry strong enough to frighten the chickens. Daniel named the baby Ruth Agnes Hobb, after asking both Clint and Agnes with tears he denied having. Clint had to leave the room when he heard Ruth's name, but Agnes found him by the water tower and stood beside him until grief passed through without taking him along. Spring warmed the valley. Grass rose green beside the rails. Clint repaired the old cabin near the elm, replacing broken chinking, building shelves, sanding the rough table until Agnes could run her hand over it without catching a splinter. He said it needed work if anyone was to live there decent. Agnes did not ask who anyone meant. One evening near sunset, she came to the cabin carrying a folded cloth. Clint was fitting a new latch to the door. I made curtains, she said. He looked at the cloth. Blue calico, small white flowers. For here, for the windows. Unless railroad guards prefer living like cave bears. I quit being full railroad, then half a cave bear. He smiled, and it came easier now. She hummed the curtains while he pretended not to watch. The cabin changed at once, not grandly, just enough. A softer square of blue at the window. A place touched by a woman's choice, not forced upon her. When she finished, she stood in the middle of the room, suddenly shy. Clint removed his hat. Agnes, I need to say something plain, and I'll likely do it poorly. Her eyes warmed. You often do. That is fair. She folded her hands to hide a smile. He took a breath. When I first brought you here, I told myself I was keeping a promise to my sister. Then I told myself I was helping because your father was wrong. Then I told myself you needed a friend. He paused. All those things were true. None of them are the whole truth now. Agnes looked at him steadily. I love you, Clint said, not because you were silent, not because you spoke, not because you needed help. I love you because when the world pressed hard, you chose truth without becoming cruel. You made me want to be braver than my regret. Her eyes filled, but she did not look away. I'm not asking to own your road, he said. I am asking if I might walk beside it. For a long moment, only the evening wind answered, moving through the new curtains. Then Agnes stepped close and placed her hand against his vest, over the pocket where he still kept her note. Then become what I saw, she whispered. I'm trying, I know. She kissed him first. It was not sudden fire. It was a door opening after a long winter, careful and warm and almost unbelieving. Clint held her as if tenderness were something entrusted to him, not taken. Outside, a train whistle sounded in the distance, but neither of them turned toward it. They married in June beneath the cottonwood beside Cinder Creek because Agnes wanted open sky, and Mary said churches were still learning manners. Reverend Vale performed the ceremony with humility. Samuel Briggs stood beside Clint. Mary held baby Ruth Agnes and cried through the vows. The widows brought quilts, bread, preserves, and one silver hair comb that had belonged to Agnes' mother, recovered from Elias's locked desk after the bank examination. Agnes wore no gray. She wore a cream dress Mary had altered and a blue ribbon at her throat. When asked if she took Clint Monroe as her husband, her voice carried clear to the back row. I do. Clint's answer came rough. I do. Later, when the supper tables were set near the tracks and lanterns swung from cottonwood branches, Orrin Pike approached with a parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside was the old freight tag, the one that had once read eastbound, no return. He had crossed out the words carefully and written something new beneath them, homebound, by choice. Agnes stared at it for a long time. Clint waited, ready to throw it in the stove if it hurt her. Instead, she folded it and placed it in her mother's Bible. Years later, people in Pike Crossing would tell the story differently, depending on what they needed to believe. Some said Clint Monroe rode into town for supplies and came back with a banker's daughter. Some said Agnes Ellsworth had been rescued from a train she never boarded. Some said a silent woman brought down a corrupt bank with nothing but a pencil stub and courage. But at Cinder Creek, where the rails shone gold at sunset and the kitchen windows wore blue calico curtains, they knew the truer version. A hard man had ridden into town thinking supplies were beans, coffee, flour, and cartridges. He left with a woman the town had mistaken for broken. She did not fix him quickly. He did not save her simply. They chose again and again to stand where shame had once stood and make something living there. On quiet evenings, Agnes would sit on the porch with ledgers balanced, and baby Ruth Agnes asleep in Mary's old cradle. When the Hobbs visited, Clint would come in from the barn, hang his hat, and pause as if still surprised to find light waiting for him. Sometimes Agnes spoke, sometimes she did not. Clint learned that both could be peaceful, and whenever the westbound train passed, shaking the earth and carrying strangers toward unknown towns, Agnes would reach for his hand, not from fear anymore, not because she needed holding in place, because she had chosen where to stay. And Clint Monroe, who once believed his heart was safest behind distance, would lace his fingers through hers and thank God that one dusty morning in Pike Crossing, he had been late buying supplies.